Kia ora koutou, everybody, Territory 3 community. John Holt here, and very, very excited to introduce and welcome Vaughan Fergusson, founder of Vend, obviously just recently acquired, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. So really, I've said to Vaughan, we've got a wide range of people in our community, from some folks who are just thinking about starting a venture through to those who are just looking for a bit of inspiration or listening to some stories who have had a number of successful ventures. So Vaughan, welcome. It's great to have you here. And I thought just to kick off, it would be great for you just to maybe tell us a little bit about the way you see yourself and who you are. And then I thought we'd just rip into a little recap on the story of Vend from the founder himself.
Yeah. So what do you want me to say? To talk about who I am? I don't know. I think I'm still on that journey of figuring out exactly who I am and what I do. I guess I've been tinkering around with computers my whole life and been an accidental entrepreneur along the way. But really, the honest answer is I've just been unemployable my entire career. So I've had to go and start my own things. Otherwise, I'd be broke.
Out too badly for you, mate.
Well, yeah, it seems to have, had a few hits, a few misses, a lot of misses. But yeah, seems to have worked out okay.
Very cool, very cool. We might come back to a few of those misses, but look, tell us. We were riffing on this last week about the way you started Vend. I thought it was quite a cool way to sort of kick a venture off. So if you wouldn't mind, if you sort of flick us through the story from the start to the beginning on the poacher stamp, that would start to the end, I should say. That would be cool.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how far back we want to go as the start, because for me, Vend very much was a kind of a life journey, something I've always wanted to do. Even I remember when I was a kid, I would have been, I don't know, 6, 7, and we'd make box forts in the bedroom, and I created this office. I created this partitioned off, because I had to share a bedroom with my brothers. So I partitioned off this corner of the bedroom, and that was the office. And I was going to be a businessman. And that's kind of where the make believe began. And ever since then, I've always explored how you can go and do things yourself and start businesses. And then the other element of that is obviously around technology, because I've always grown up around computers and technology, and went and studied computer science. Had a bit of a mixed relationship with education. Sort of fell in love with education in schools and universities, but came out the other side and found myself offered this role in a startup. I would have been, I don't know, 20 at the time. And I didn't know it was a startup. I just thought this is how work was. So it was me and the founder, and we were just like, it was gritty as, and we were just like making it up as we went, kind of. And that was kind of like earning my stripes, I guess, and it kind of set the bar. I just that was how I expected the world to work and what work was like. And so I did that for about 5 years, and then ever since then, I got the taste of the startup life, and that was my only real job I've ever had. And since then, I've started businesses, originally mostly around sort of agency creative stuff. How this was the era of the web kind of coming through, and so did a lot of work, set up a number of agencies, some which I sold, some which I wound up, really just helping organizations understand the power of in what we now call the cloud. Back then it was just like getting the internet to do interesting shit. And then spun off a couple of startups out of some of in the downtimes, and the agencies always made sure that we put our skills to use and following some product ideas. And then fast forward to, when was it, 2009, had the idea. Well, I had a few customers come to me who were in retail, and they were like asking for something that I thought sounded pretty straightforward. They wanted to be able to leverage their in-store stock and be able to sell that easily online. And at that time, they had to manage their inventory in a separate platform for their e-commerce, and then they'd have this shitty POS in store, which is what they actually use to run their in-store stock. And I thought, wow, how hard could that be? We could probably weld those two things together and do some really cool stuff on the internet. And so I had a look around, and nobody had done it. Nobody had moved point of sale into the cloud fully. And so we sort of skunkworked on that, or I skunkworked on that for a few months. Wasn't quite sure whether I wanted to go whole hog into another startup because, I'd kind of been burnt. I've been through the ringer a few times, and I always knew that if this was going to be big, it would be a 10-year journey plus. And so before I committed to it, grabbed my bike, flew down to Invercargill, cycled to Bluff, went to the south. I went to Stewart Island, and then I made myself a commitment. It's like if I could cycle from Stewart Island up to Cape Reinga and still thought doing this, the startup was a great idea, then I'd do it. And so that's what I did. And as I went, I caught up with a bunch of folk who I knew from the industry and bounced the idea off them. Many of whom became investors ultimately. And then and got to Cape Reinga and got off the bike and thought, well, what do I do now? Might as well do this crazy idea for a startup. And then that was the beginning of Vend.
Very cool, very cool. And so, everybody knows where it ended up, but really keen, I guess, on some of your thoughts around some of the times, that weren't so good, in the journey. I think we tend to write the stories of a fantastical, magical, straight line to uber success. What was kind of the most memorable in a bad way, I guess, lowest moment in the journey for you?
Yeah, I mean, straight up, that was 2014. It was a clusterfuck of a year. It was a terrible year on many fronts. I'd just begun the a marriage separation. We were doing a capital raise that went south. We were running out of cash. A close family member went into hospital with a serious issue that we weren't sure whether or not she would make it out. Anyway, there was a long list, and it just seemed to all be piling onto it on top of each other. And yeah, that time was one of those times where you talk about staring into the abyss, and you're just not sure whether or not you can go another day, because it could all come crashing down tomorrow. But for some reason, you pick yourself up and you go again. But yeah, I remember, oh man, there was a couple of times where I thought, this is it. This is it. It can't get any worse, and it's probably not going to get better. Maybe it's all going to collapse. And I was very grateful that I had people around me who were probably a lot calmer, because they weren't living the experience that I was living, and they just helped me see a path through. And Alex Fuller is one of those guys. I remember being I think we were in Melbourne, and we were just closing the round, and an investor rang me and said, no, we're not going to do it. And like, it felt at the time that investor was the last resort. And Alex and I just sat there, and we came up with a plan. And I remember lying on the couch thinking, shit, I don't know if I can do this. And we just talked it through, and we came up with a plan, and we talked that investor around, and they came on board and kind of saved our bacon. But yeah, I mean, these are the stories that, this is not unique. These are the stories, I'm hearing time and time again through founders that I'm working with. So it's just like, it's just part of startup life. It's the bitter part. But really, it does come down to just picking yourself up. If you can go again, if you can go another day, then your options are there. So you just keep going and keep going. But yeah, but personally, that was a very tough year. And after, as soon as we got through this, I made a commitment. I was like, if we can get through this, then holy shit, I need to hand this off to somebody else, because I've got like a whole bunch of stuff that I just need to sort out. And then, and ultimately that became Alex, who stepped into the CE role. As I just knew Alex was that person I could trust to kind of take the wheel while I went and sorted some stuff out. And yeah, and Alex ran the ship, steered the ship for 5-6 years.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I think we've all heard from a lot of founders. Can you sort of run us through your thoughts, like I guess at the time, but now, sort of if you were talking to Vaughan back then around that founder transition of transferring the baby to somebody else to actually lead, because it's really often one which puts a lot of anxiety on founders in terms of who to get to do that and when to do it and how to do it.
Yeah, well, rightly or wrongly, as a founder CEO, you have all this pressure that all this weight that sits on your shoulders, especially if you've gone and raised money. You're spending other people's money in your business, and you've hired people, and so there's all this weight of expectation. Everybody's looking up to you for the path forward, and it's this constant struggle as that leader that you have to. It's kind of this cognitive dissonance, which is like, how bad it could possibly be, but you've got to present a positive face to everyone. Because if you go around saying shit, we're fucked, then the staff aren't going to feel the team aren't going to feel too hot about that, and your investors aren't going to like that either. That's the bit that really kind of wears you down, is like constantly putting on that, not a blind optimism, but constantly putting forward that the positive path message, which is like, actually, we've got a plan, we're going to work our way through it, and we're going to get to the other side. And the other thing is, the weight doesn't necessarily need to sit 100% on your shoulders either. I think about founders and leaders as being right for a particular stage of a business. Like, I know I'm an early stage person because I can just magic stuff up, and I can tell a great story, and I can, get people on a mission, and build something from nothing. I'm kind of a oily rag kind of person, but then once the business got to a scale stage where it's like, okay, this thing's working, we've got the product market fit, we've got a few creaks in our sales and marketing pipeline, we've got churn issues. Once you start to get into that mechanical stuff of like, how do you actually then scale up this business? That wasn't me. I was like, that stuff doesn't really excite me, and in fact, I'm not very good at it. And so, that's when I handed it over to Alex as well. And it was very, like, I found that process, I found it really interesting because I dug into it, and I spoke to a lot of founders who had made the same change, and brought in a professional CEO, or whatever you want to call it. And the overwhelming feedback was, don't do it. It's going to end in disaster. And I was like, that's really interesting, because I can't actually rationalize why it would just be the default position would be that would not work. And what I figured was, it doesn't work if you as the founder don't let it work. At least that was my thesis. And I was like, well, I just need to go into this and just be making sure that I need to get over my ego. Every time I feel like it's not going to work, I need to think that through and understand why I'm thinking that. And that was actually one of the hard things was, because Alex was stepped into the role, and he wanted to go a slightly different direction, and I remember sitting there thinking, I don't know if that's right, but but you're the CEO now, so I need to back you 100%. Like, if there's any dissent, then that's not going to look great. And so I just worked with Alex and made sure that it was very clear that he had the keys, and if he wanted to go a particular direction at a particular speed, 100%, I'd support him 100%.
Can you sort of elaborate on that a bit more? Because obviously you would still have been on the board of the business as well, and I think this is kind of the founder challenge that isn't in sort of governance 101, when you're a significant shareholder, a director, and the former CEO, but also with that founder influence. How did you sort of manage like that multi-personality issue?
Yeah, you become bipolar or tripolar. And I would always describe it as just wearing a different hat on a different day in a different meeting. But yeah, it was weird. Like, as the largest individual shareholder, as a director, as the former CEO, as the founder. There was all these hats or labels that people would use, and or be like personas that I'd be representing. And yeah, I don't have a solution to this. I still found it, right up to our last board meeting a few months ago. It was like, I'm turning up as a director. I'm not turning up as a shareholder. I'm not turning up as the founder. I'm turning up as a director. And it creates weird tensions because, especially if Alex and I didn't agree with something, and then he brought it to the board meeting, like I kind of had to, I felt like, well, we've crossed that bridge, we've had that discussion, but now at a board level, I need to, I can't just be sour because you didn't agree with me and be down on it. I then need to come at it, with a different lens. And that was a bit hard. Maybe, Alex and subsequently Anna maybe found that a bit weird because, maybe, it seemed like I flip-flopped on opinions, but, I was really just trying to be supportive of them 100% where I could, and tried to get all the sort of the gritty stuff, out of the boardroom where possible. But yeah, then being as a shareholder, it's just weird. It's a real mindfuck having to, work through all that. There is no formula or easy solution. You just have to actively take on and put on and take off those hats and be very deliberate and conscious about it.
So one more just riff on an aspect of that, if you don't mind, which is just probably actually reflecting back for the earlier stage folks around that sort of, hey, we're three guys and girls in the garage, whatever it is, we've decided to get out of our day jobs and start, and now we need to start thinking about this sort of governance thing in terms of, is it advisory board, is it governance, looking back, what would you say to somebody going, hey, and they probably do quite often, I'd imagine, we need some help, we need some external perspective, how do we kick that off?
Yeah, I think a lot of people start with the default position being, I need to have this board, fill this board full of people who can help me. And so the first question I ask a founder when she or he comes to me, with that request to help them fill a board, I ask them, it's like, well, are you looking for help for you or help for the business? Because if you're looking for a sounding board or somebody who can just help you, give you some bad advice and then you can choose whether or not to take it, that's not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to stack a board full of smart people to do that. Because the board's actually not there in your best interest. The board's there in the business's best interest. And more often than not, when I kind of dig into it with founders, what they really want is an advisory board or people who, they can go, because there is that dynamic between the board and the founder, and especially if you're the CEO, is that, the board can fire you if they don't think you're the right person for the job. I believe it does change the relationship between founders and the board, unless they proactively address that and talk about that. And in fact, some of the most inspirational founders that I talk to, that's often the first question that they bring to the board meeting, which is like, am I still the right person for the role? But that aside, 9 times out of 10, usually they just need somebody to talk shit with and like talk about what's going horribly wrong, which they may not necessarily want to talk to the board about. I mean, they probably should, but they probably just need somebody to get the right framing to, so that they're thinking about it the right way and to spitball some solutions and also hear stories about, how you may have done it in the past, not necessarily that it's going to mean anything for, the context of their business, but, and then for a board, I mean, especially in the early stages, you've got to be careful you don't introduce a lot of weight, because your time is precious. And if you're having, every person you have on your board is a commitment you're making to them to keep them informed and so that they can then feed back to you and help provide advice back into the business. And so if you go and stack a big board really early on, then that's a number of hours that you're pulling out of your time to make that commitment to keep them up to date. and and maybe you don't need that. Maybe you need a board for governance, just to make sure that you're not going to run the business off a cliff, and you're not going to get anybody killed. But maybe in the early stages, I would optimize more for just having smart people around you who can give you good advice. The other thing is that an advisory board, you can just fire them all anytime you want. If you don't like their advice, then you can go find somebody else to talk to. It's a lot harder to remove board members.
Totally. So back to the Vend story generally, I started on the downer with the lowest moment, highest moment of the journey.
Well, the obvious answer is like exiting, but actually that's not. I mean, that's sort of great outcome. And, I always said I was going to build $1 billion business. We got halfway there, $500 million. So that's pretty good. I'm not going to like poo-poo that. That's a pretty cool outcome.
51%, mate.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Take it.
The high points. I mean, there's just lots of them. Like, actually, a couple of the high points, again, related to the exit, was just receiving messages from folks, early team members and current team members, because it was always important to me to make sure that everybody had equity in the business, and we were one of the pioneers of doing equity schemes in New Zealand. We kind of had to invent an ESOP scheme back in 2010 because IRD didn't really know what the rules were, and so we were like, okay, we'll just make it up, and we'll keep you informed. Hopefully, we don't get into trouble. And like, as soon as the transaction became public, I probably received a couple of dozen messages from folks saying, thank you. I can now afford to buy a house, or I bought a house. Cool. And this was probably, they probably had a bunch of Vend shares that maybe they had written off, maybe they thought that, it would never equate to anything. But then suddenly did, and it was meaningful for them. That was, those events, so that series of events was definitely a ongoing highlight, because that was part of the dream. I was like, I really want to make sure that everybody does really well out of this, and that we kind of create this next generation of entrepreneurs who can then pay it forward. So anybody who's watching, if you got the cash, you need to pay it forward. You need to do the same and bring some other folks along. That was a highlight. I think the product and what we were doing as a mission, it's still a highlight, and still a habit I can't get out of, is when I walk into a retail store, is like peering over the counter and seeing if they're using Vend. But just the way that we've changed retailers' lives and made running a retail store so much easier, and all that sort of stuff. Even though I've sold the company, I still get excited by that, and I'm now a significant shareholder in Lightspeed, who acquired us, and so I'm really excited about what they're going to do with the Vend product moving forward. So that's why it's like not an end, because the Vend product lives on. It's part of a bigger mission now, and the team are still leading that same charge. Like, nothing's changed really. It's the same mission and same vision and everything, and so it's going to live on. So that's super cool. Because quite often with exits, it can be a talent acquisition, or a customer acquisition, or but this felt like it was 100% aligned. The cultures between Vend and Lightspeed were so aligned. The Vend product just fitted really perfectly into the product strategy for what Lightspeed were doing and wanted to do. The people, we've built world-class teams, and it felt like they almost plugged in perfectly to the engine at Lightspeed. It was just everything kind of fit perfectly, or as perfectly as you can get these things. Which
True
is
synergy.
Yeah, well, which is one of the reasons why I guess we decided to sell, because we didn't need to. It was maybe we can segue into kind of the crazy, the topsy-turvy year that was 2020, because we went into that year, and suddenly everything changed, and we thought, shit, maybe we don't even have a business anymore, because maybe the whole world is going to shut down, and retail is going to 50% of it was conceivable that half the retailers in the world could go out of business. And so we went into 2020 thinking, shit. And at that same time, Alex stepped out of the CE role, and Anna stepped in. And so she kind of had, she stepped into the role a month before COVID hit, and
Wow.
she definitely had baptism by fire. But she picked up exactly where Alex had left off, and had obviously been in the business and been our CFO for a number of years, and steered us through. We looked into that chasm again, and steered us through, and we got the business through to be profitable and growing. And then so the COVID turned very quickly from a very bad news story for retail to a very good news story for retail tech platforms like Vend, because the whole industry, the stuff we'd been talking about for years about being stuck on legacy software, well, overnight the entire industry felt that pain, because they had to lock up their stores, and all their data and all their systems were locked up in the stores, and they couldn't get access to anything. They couldn't sell online. And also the bigger retailers, who had these investments of millions of dollars into these old legacy solutions, suddenly they were dead in the water. They couldn't do things like click and collect, just because their technology just couldn't do it, because it was all offline on-premise stuff.
Wow.
And so COVID very quickly turned into this boon for us. And we had large retailers kicking down our doors, wanting our technology. We had all the smaller retailers needing to suddenly optimize their business and sell online and do click and collect. And so then we had to scramble, because we had to release new features to support a bunch of stuff that was the feedback that was coming through thick and fast. And we did that. And yeah, it was a really amazing, strange, bizarro year. And then it got even more bizarre, because then the phone started ringing, and we just had all these companies ringing us up, just asking us, if we were for sale. And some of these companies, were name brands, right? And we were like, the first three, we were like, whatever. we didn't even think they were serious. But then like the fourth and the fifth, and we were like, hang on a second here. It's like something's going on. What's going on? And the feedback was pretty much universal. Everybody was like, well, you've got the best product in the industry, and it's this massive consolidation thing that's happening. Suddenly, e-commerce and in-store has been fused forever now. Even though we've been pioneering it for over 10 years, it's like, nah, this is the norm now. This is how retail needs to work, and you've got the best platform. And yeah, so but we very quickly went from, okay, well, we don't need to sell, we don't want to sell, we're pretty happy doing what we're doing. But then we just had a few conversations in depth with two or three parties, and actually at the end we felt Lightspeed had the same mission that the reasons I gave you before, had the same mission that we had, the same culture. They had a lot more resource. They were a publicly listed company with a huge market cap and a bunch of cash in the bank. We thought, well, I mean, we could keep going, and we're growing at a good rate, and the opportunity for retail just suddenly ballooned, 100 times bigger than it was. But maybe this gives us a great point to bring a return to shareholders, recapitalize the business, by being part of something bigger, which allows us to go faster at the mission. And yeah, it just all stacked up. It seemed like the perfect timing, the thing I had to get over, which was the 1 billion mission thing. But it's like, well, I can probably live with that.
You still sleep okay at night?
I do. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, folks on the webinar, I see Julie from Christchurch, you've got your hand up, but we've actually got a little Q&A section on Zoom. So if you wanted to just blast your question in there, we've got a couple here, Vaughan, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One from Greg. Hey, Greg. Just love Vaughan's authenticity, honesty, and shared experience. So bloody good. Looking forward to sharing the recording with our wider team. Oh, there you go. That's very nice. I didn't have to answer that one.
I don't have to. I like those sorts of questions. Thank you. Thank you, Greg.
From Thomas. Incredible story, Vaughan. Congrats on pushing through all the challenges and getting the result. He's asking about, one thing, making sure that board meetings are actually creating value for the company rather than being a box-ticking exercise. What a great question. You've sat on both sides of the table. Love to hear what tips you have for getting the most out of board members and the meetings. Nice one.
That's a really great question. I mean, a board's role is to tick boxes. There are some very important boxes that need to be ticked. Health and safety, making sure you're spending the money wisely, and you're not going to run out of it. And I don't know if I was great at this, but I think the most impactful thing you can do is set the agenda for the board. Like you choose as to as long as you're going through that procedural stuff and the essential governance stuff. Your board meetings shouldn't just be about that. You should be bringing pressing issues to the board and asking for their guidance on these things. The way I didn't do this very well, but I saw Alex and Anna do this very well, which was like just to set a cadence with the board and signal in advance deep dives into things, because you can't answer all the questions all the time all at once, because your role as a founder is to kind of like deal with all that and then and then pop stuff up to the board as you see necessary. And quite often it's very topical stuff. Like it'll be the thing that was keeping you awake, the night before the board meeting. And then that thing could probably be dealt with and vanish 2 days later. And so the way I've seen it work really well is where you kind of have regular things like, okay, we're going to do a product deep dive, we're going to do a sales and marketing deep dive, we're going to do whatever those big chunky things are. And then you signal that with the board that just like, the July meeting is going to be, we're going to bring in some of the team, we're going to go deep in this, and these are the sorts of questions that we're pondering. And that's great, because it's a great way to keep your board informed as to kind of how the business is running and how it actually works. Because that's the other thing is that you forget, is like you turn up to the board meeting and you've got all this context, you've got all everything, the drama, everything of the day-to-day that's been going on, and you're the expert on all those things. But your board members, their exposure is usually the board meetings and board papers, and any other time that you invest with them to keep them informed. So these sorts of deep dives are just great. It's a great way to educate them on the nuances of the business and the industry, but also created a really great opportunity for you to go deep and talk about some of the nitty-gritty.
Very cool. I want to ask you about impossible challenges in a minute, but there's a question from Josh, which I think we'll just take first, which is really, I think, probably what's on a lot of people's minds on this call, hopefully, is the international expansion, globalization. So what key lessons did you learn along the way going global?
Yeah, that was something that was it seemed obvious and straightforward to me, right from day one, which is like, well, as a New Zealand SaaS company, like our customer base is going to be 99% outside of New Zealand, and so absolutely, as a technology business where it's all on the cloud and you can kind of hide behind a web browser, 100% you can run that from New Zealand. You can do that 100% from New Zealand, but at some point you're going to need to be talking to your customers, talking to partners. You're going to have these relationships, and it helps if you're in time zone and you speak with the right accent, and you have people who share a similar culture. It's just that simple. It's just, as humans, people would almost flinch when they'd hear a New Zealand accent on the other end of the phone when they were talking to us, because they in their mind's eye, Vend was a valley startup. We were based in the US somewhere, and so I said it was obvious and straightforward, and that was me showing my real naivety. I tend to run into things without before I really think through it into completion, and so for us, we were just like, okay, well, we probably need to set up an office in Australia, because at the time that's where a majority of our customers are coming from, but we were getting a lot of customers coming from North America. And then we ran a quick little exercise to figure out, we wanted to open another office so we could have complementary time zones, so we could answer the phone and the emails and support tickets and the sales inquiries 24/7, or at least 24 hours a day. And we had a look at whether it was somewhere in the UK, Barcelona, and Europe. Where else were we looking? In the US somewhere, and then we settled on Toronto. We decided that Canada would be a great place because it was a great time zone. There was some overlap between New Zealand and Toronto. And then literally my CRO at the time, JC, I just said to him, it's like, hey, maybe you could pop over to Toronto and open us up an office. And that's what he did. He literally just packed a suitcase, went to Toronto for a few weeks. And we set up Vend Canada totally. I probably shouldn't say this. Totally illegally. Like, we had no, I mean, we just did it. I don't even know if it was illegal, but we just turned up and rented some office space and then started hiring people. Then realized, oh, there's we probably need to get some lawyers involved and actually figure out how we can actually employ people in Canada.
Would you do it differently this again now? I mean, not just put the illegal or legal side to one side.
Well, I mean, I can claim ignorance that time. I probably can't do that twice. I'd probably get into trouble. Especially after this has been recorded, right? So, but no, if I was in a time machine and went back and did it again, no, absolutely not. Like, we just move fast, and there's a solution. There's usually a solution to everything. But if we had followed the advice that we were getting, and I tell this example, and I probably don't make many friends with NZTE at the time, because we were talking to our NZTE case manager and saying, look, we need some help. We're thinking we want to go open an office in North America, and we set a meeting. They set a meeting. It's like, okay, well, maybe we can get one of our advisors to help you out in a few weeks' time. And they set a meeting. And by the time of that meeting, JC had already been in Toronto and opened the office. And, we were just moving too fast. Well, not too fast. Maybe it was too fast, but, we were just moving fast. And it felt good. It felt exciting, and would I do it again? Sure, absolutely. With knowing what I know now, I'd probably do things a little bit differently. But I guess I'm contradicting myself. But I guess what I'm saying is that if you've got the enthusiasm, if you've got the people who want to go and break ground, absolutely go do it. Yeah. And then very quickly fill in the gaps and bring in the advice and patch all the gaps as you go to make sure you're not getting anybody into trouble or breaking any rules. Cool.
I'm going to ask you about these impossible challenges because I think it's really cool. And actually, when I saw you on the journey, that was usually my first question. I thought it was also, probably unintentionally quite a clever way to, because you're kind of almost tracking Vaughan on, what crazy shit is he doing this year, which is quite memorable. But just to give you the tail end of this, because we've had a question which I'm really appreciative of, is really about handling your own mental health as a founder as well. So just with that in mind, that's going to come at you sort of after the track. But tell us about Vaughan and the impossible challenges. Why did that come about, and how did you come up with that as a sort of a continual thing for you?
Yeah, it came about. I started doing these about 13 years ago, or maybe a bit longer now, and if I actually think about it, it was a direct response to mental health. I realized I had an obsessive compulsive behavior. I just had these, I would hear voices in my head continuously, not like the you're going insane voices, or maybe they were, but, I would have the self-talk and, I would just, I don't know, I just notice these things about me that, I thought were not helpful. And I picked doing impossible challenges as a way to refocus my mind on something. So I would always be hyper analytical about the startup I was working on, the thing, or that I was letting people down, and it was all those negative thoughts that we probably all share when we're on the journey. And I decided, well, a lot of the stuff is not in my control, but maybe if I pick something that seems like it's so impossible, so out of my control, and then focus on that, and do it, then that will give me a sense of satisfaction, and it'll probably be a good focus for me. So I'm not constantly in this doom spiral about all these other things. So that's kind of how it started. And then, over that decade journey, I've done things, started off simple, like, quitting smoking or quitting drinking booze for a year, and quitting smoking forever. That seemed like a good thing to do. And then like doing a lot of removing bad stuff out of my life, and then introducing new things, and a lot of those tended to be physical challenges. So the first big physical challenge was that bike ride that I talked about, where just went down to Stewart Island with my crappy mountain bike, and then spent 6 weeks cycling to the top. And I remember thinking, it's like, cycling the length of New Zealand, that's just nuts. I was an overweight tech guy, and my doctor had called me morbidly obese, about a month earlier. And I thought, no, it's just no, I'd seen, people who ride bikes who wear Lycra and all that sort of thing. It's like, I don't look like them. I don't know. That just seems nuts. How could I even do that? But then, because I'm an analytical guy, I just broke it down. It's like, well, New Zealand's roughly, my route was something like, 2,600 kilometers. That seems like a high number. And then I broke it down and said, well, how many kilometers do I think I could ride a day? And then I just, broke it down. Actually, I live my life I love spreadsheets. Google Sheets is my favorite app of all times. And I just created a plan and a spreadsheet of like how I would do it and the alternate routes. And so that was like, I could rationalize, okay, well, this is doable. Then there was the physical side of it. It's like, well, can I still ride a bike? Can I ride a bike up a hill? I did that and went up a hill, and then fell off my bike and vomited in a bush, and did that a few times until I didn't vomit in bushes. And then I was like, yes, I can ride up a hill. And then I just found that, like, the more time I spent on a bike, the easier it got. And then and so that was the bike ride thing, and I cycled. It took me 6 weeks, and I lost, in the whole process, I lost about 20 to 30 kgs, depending on, whether it was pre-training or, on the actual bike ride. I lost a shit ton of weight. And I got to the other end, I was like, wow, this is like amazing. I didn't think I'd be able to do it. And it turned out to be, I was also very privileged in that I could just take 6 weeks off and go do it, because my previous startup had kind of crashed and burned. And so I didn't have a job. And then I've done things like running 1,000 kilometers. I upgraded the cycling one, and I cycled around the world a few years ago.
Around the world.
Yeah, just around the world. But I say that, but I was kind of I did a kind of a cheaty route. I wanted to cycle around the world in 80 days, which, by the way, is impossible unless you're on a flying bike. And then my partner Zoe had this brilliant idea. She was like, well, let's just find the latitude, the latitude around the world that has around about the right amount of land that you could cycle in 80 days. And so coincidentally found it was like I can't remember what it was, the 43rd parallel. And that just happened to be Cape Town, across South Africa, across Australia, across the fat bit of New Zealand from Raglan to East Cape, and then across South America and the chunky bit from Chile over to Buenos Aires. Happens to be a big mountain range in the way there. You might have heard of it, called the Andes.
Did you vomit climbing up the Andes on your bike?
I didn't, but that's because the Andes was at the end of the trip. That was going to be that was strange. It was the thing I was looking forward to the most, which sounds nuts, because then you got to cycle over this massive mountain range, and like, I didn't even know if there was going to be a path. Like, all the photos I could find of all the routes across the Andes, they just look terrifying, with these series of switchbacks that just go all the way up the mountain, and broke car carcasses on the side of the road where people have fallen off cliffs, and all this stuff.
Not your traditional tourist brochure.
No. And but I was looking forward to it, because I thought that was really the challenge, is cycling over the Andes. And I just used cycling, across South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand as warm up to get there. And I was really looking forward to, because when you go up, you get to come down. And I was really looking forward to going down the other side, because from the top of the Andes, it's downhill all the way to Buenos Aires. And so that was definitely something I was looking forward to.
Very cool.
But no, it was, and it was another highlight because my good friend Tim Norton from 90 Seconds, he's probably as mad as I am. He said, look, I'm just going to come with you and we're going to cycle part of the trip around the world. And I said, well, come and join me in South America. We can cycle over the Andes. He was like, yes, I'll do that. I'll be there. And then I remember, I think I messaged him about 2 weeks before, and I said, you still on for this? And he was like, yes. And then he just turned up with his bike and we did it together. And I was like, so grateful that I had Tim there. So, if it went horribly wrong, at least we could share it together. But it was such an amazing experience. And it was one of those things that, with better judgment, probably wouldn't have done it.
Very cool though. Very cool. So, so the impossible challenges, and then, back to sort of one of the drivers there, our mental health. Thanks, Greg, for your question, which was, just the direct one really that I don't think we ask enough of folks to share perspectives around is, as a founder, when the shit hits the fan, tips and tricks, or how do you handle wellness? How do you handle your head?
It's still an issue. Like, I don't know if I had, whether I brought the mental health issues with me, or sort of developed them on my journey in kind of startup land. Definitely still have them, and I think the best way to manage mental health is to share it with others. And something I still struggle with, because it still has this this feeling, it still has this air of weakness, and that if you if you're struggling, then maybe you're not good enough, which just compounds the whole thing, because then you start having that doom spiral of those thoughts around, am I good enough? I seem to be finding this really hard. It is hard. It's fucking hard. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But it's just being honest with yourself and with the people around you who care about you. Like, I've definitely had some friends come and go over the journey, and some of the times it might have been my fault. Other times I feel like they were people who just weren't right. They weren't at a stage where they could support you through the stuff that you're going through. Although if you're fair weather friends, or as soon as the shit gets hard, they pull up the tent and move on.
Yeah.
But definitely find those people, those trusted people around you who you can talk to. And also, don't bullshit people. If you're finding stuff hard, if you're having a hard day, it's so cathartic to just talk about stuff and just get it off your chest. Like, the secret is everybody's going through the same shit, or different shit, but probably same amplitude, right? It's just like, we don't tell each other. We put on this brave exterior. It's like, I'm the master of my domain and everything's under control, and we're all doing it. But really, under the hood, we're all dealing with some heavy stuff. And that extends outside of startup life as well. That's just life in general. But I find just being honest and humble, and that's kind of my trademark, I guess. It's just probably saying stuff out loud that other people wouldn't, but it gets it off my mind. And exercise. So practical stuff. Exercise is great.
Cycling the Andes.
Go get on a bike and cycle a country. You don't have to go that far. Like, actually, when I was doing the running challenge, that was my mental health thing, which was like, I just went for a 3K run every day. And so obviously the goal wasn't to cycle 1,000 kilometers in one go, because that is nuts. But I just wanted to run 1,000 kilometers, and broke that down. Gave myself a year to do it, so that was 3 kilometers a day. And even though it started off as this challenge, it's like, can I do it? Can I do the 1,000 kilometers? I very quickly realized that, yeah, easy. It's like 3Ks a day, just as long as you don't miss a few days, because then you've got to run a half marathon to catch up, which I had to do a few times. But I just found that just having that half an hour, hour, whatever it was, just to go for a run or even just a walk, it got me into that, what would you call it? Zen state, mind state, flow state, where you break through the shit, this hurts, I hate running, and then you get to that point where you're not thinking about that stuff anymore, and you're then starting to process. I call it the defrag of your brain. You just like your brain's freewheeling then, and your brain will start to think about and process the things that your subconscious really wants to think about, and you may not come up with solutions, but you're just creating that space for you to defrag your brain, let your brain do its thing. The other great way of doing that, which I've come to very late in life, is sleep. It's like getting great sleep, and if you can do those things well, get a bit of exercise, have great sleep. Like there's no shortcutting. Like the myth of like sleeping under your desk and like doing 20-hour days, it's like it's a myth. It's like it's impossible. You just can't sustain that. It's just nuts. You got to invest in yourself. You got to make sure you're sleeping well, eating well. Forget the boozy network things. They're great to do, but if your life is continuously, going along to schmooze at things, then maybe you've got your balance out of whack. But I mean, I start to sound like my mum. It's like look after yourself. There's only one of you. It seems obvious. You're just a system. Your inputs and outputs, and if you're not putting the right inputs in, you're going to get real shit outputs. Yeah.
The reason mums are like that, though, they're pretty wise, aren't they? It's what it sort of comes down to, looking after yourself.
Exactly.
Very cool. And so, I mean, just in terms of, and we've actually only got about 9 minutes left, and I'm conscious I want to hear what you're up to next as well. But just because it is such a big topic, from a leadership point of view, what were the sort of highlights of your investment and program around your people for their mental health and wellness in the Vend journey? How did you do that?
Establishing our cultural MO, which I guess didn't start out as a very conscious thing. Again, it was one of those naive things where I just wanted people to be happy and to flourish and bring all the special things that made them them. I optimized for people who had passions for things and were passionate about what we were doing over experience. Because my theory was, like, if you have good people who are super passionate about the stuff that they do and the stuff that you're doing, then you can kind of figure all the other stuff out. Like, technology changes so quick. You can learn new stuff, as long as people are passionate about it, really quickly. And you can solve a lot of problems with passion. There will be those times where you need to do those 20-hour days. I'm not saying they don't exist. But if you've got the right people who bring the right energy, then those tough times get a hell of a lot easier. And then we just started being deliberate about it and actually, what is our culture? What are the things that are important to us? And on the mental health side of things, well, first of all, was we want people to bring themselves. Like, don't pretend to be. Don't have like the work Vaughan and then the home Vaughan. We want you. It's like, just be who you are. Don't I found it weird, especially when I was growing up, that people would put on suits and ties and like almost like go through this pantomime of having this work persona. It's like, we don't want that. We want you to be you, and all the different dimensions that can take, of lifestyle and experience and interests. And we've always had, that's always been an important cornerstone of the Vend culture, even through Alex's leadership and Anna's leadership, which is that we want you to be you. And then the other value was, we look after each other, because we're doing the impossible is another value of ours. Wonder where that one comes from. But when you're doing hard stuff, you need to look out for each other, because people will have hard days, and I would see that every single day. Not every day in the office, but whenever whenever there was hard stuff going on, people were always looking out for each other. I hated those environments where people are like climbing on top of each other to, try and
Climbing the ladder.
progress. Yep, you little turtle.
All comes down to culture, eh?
Yeah, and like it just seemed like establishing culture is hard. It's very hard to retrofit when you've kind of 5 years in, and then you're like, right, we're going to establish what our culture is, unless of course it is exactly as it is, and then it's easy, you're just sort of writing it down on a bit of paper. But getting that stuff right from day one is so important, because it will determine who you hire, and because you will attract people into your business who click, who connect with your culture and your values. And if you don't know what they are, then how do you know you're bringing on the right people? Or if you figure out what they are and they're different, so it's very hard when there's 20 of you to suddenly change your culture and your values. I mean, you can do it, but yeah, I don't know if I answered the question. It's just we're all everybody turns up to work, and they're bringing this basket of stuff with them. They may have had a sleepless night because one of their kids has an ear infection. They might be going through a breakup. They might be distracted because their niece or nephew graduated, and it's great news. There's like people bring lives with them, and and you just need to be prepared. And a lot of the stuff people don't wear on their shoulder either. They just like they hide, they keep inside because they're doing, I need to present my work face. Right? But I find if you can let people feel trusted that they can share all the stuff with them, it means that they can share the load a bit. And sure, maybe they'll have a week where they're thoroughly distracted because they've got some shit going on. That's okay. And in fact, if you can help them through that stuff, then and then they'll be back quicker. But yeah, people is the hardest thing in doing a venture. People are the most important thing because you can't do a venture without them. But I think I will go to the grave, whether that's whenever that is, still not mastering people, because we're all different, but it's the most important investment you can make.
Yeah, well said, 100%, mate. Hey, the last question, I guess, and coming back to your comments about being privileged and successful and having an exit and giving back and sort of doing that. I know you're already well and truly on that path. So what's next for you? And to that side, what are you currently involved in that you'd like to tell folks about from that point of view?
Yeah. Well, other than being retired, which I'm not doing a very great job at because I seem to be busier than I ever have been. No. What about 6 years now, my partner and I set up a charitable trust called the Pam Fergusson Charitable Trust, named after my mum. And because me and my brothers had always grown up around technology and computers, we set up a charitable trust to pay that forward. My mum passed away shortly after I launched Vend, and I was kind of hoping that she would see the success of Vend, which I knew would come at the time, to kind of demonstrate to her, or kind of pay it back, the investment that she made in us as kids. Like, she was a single mum, unemployed, in a wheelchair, but she had this hunch that computers were going to change the world. So she brought home a PC one day. Actually, it wasn't a PC; it was a Sega. But over a period of 5, 10, well, actually our whole lives as kids, she continuously invested in computers and made sure that we had computers in the house, and we all went on to have successful careers with technology. And so we started this charity not to give every kid in New Zealand a computer, but to try and figure out what the next thing is, like what is going to be the next big change in science and technology, and how are we going to prepare the next generation to be the tinkerers and the inventors, so that when it becomes mainstream, they are the innovators that are changing the world. And that was the idea that we had, and we ran a very successful program called OMGTech, where we would bring kids from all different backgrounds and all different geographies and communities together, and then we would teach them how to program robots and design games and do 3D printing and drones and whatever else we could come up with that was kind of new and cutting edge, and teach them. Like, we would teach them in an hour how to code. We'd teach them in an hour how to program a robot. This was all stuff that 12-year-olds would just be all over. They just are sponges, and then they can pick it up really quickly. But then as the years went by, we were also trying to educate everybody around STEM, which now I think is quite mainstream. The idea of at science, technology, engineering, and math is really important in the education system. But now that's expanded into STEAM, and science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, and so making sure that kids were learning the stuff. But as we went, we actually realized that there's you could run these events in a green leafy suburb of Auckland, and you get lots of kids come along. Absolutely, the parents thought it was a great way to give their kids a new exposure to something, and quite happy to pay some money for some babysitting for the day. But there was lots of kids who weren't turning up. Yeah. And so we've kind of spent the last few years just really focusing on the communities of kids who just don't get these experiences, who don't have devices at home. Their communities and their schools, they just don't have technology, and they have no access, let alone actually understanding what they could do with the technology and how they could use technology to change their communities. And so we've been doing a number of programs. Sometimes it feels like we do too many and stretch ourselves thin, but it's all around that mission. We'll keep trying stuff, and we'll keep hacking the systems until we make change, until we can change the education system to bring STEM and STEAM into the curriculum, which it is now. Not saying that we can claim that, but we're definitely one of those voices that was championing it. And it's hard work, because it's not a pretty picture out there, and there are a lot of kids who are doing it really, really hard and really tough. But what we realize is without fail, I've yet to meet a kid who, as long as you can give them the opportunities, they flourish. It's not their faults, the situations that they're in. If we can kind of rig it a bit in their favor, then maybe we can make some real systematic change. And so one of the things we do, we bought a school camp in Raglan, as you do. Just buy a school camp.
It's a school camp,
and
got three of them.
It was a terrible decision. No, financially it was a terrible decision, and that's another story, another startup story. But it's this amazing asset, and we're slowly transforming it into a school camp, for science and technology and creativity. And we're prioritizing the school camp to kids and communities who wouldn't A, get to go on school camp, and B, don't have access to some of the crazy stuff that we're going to be doing there. So that's one project. We've got another project which we're relaunching hopefully in a few months, called Voluntarily. Because that's the other thing we saw is us in the industry, assuming people are in the tech industry, which is pretty much every industry these days. Everybody wants to pay it forward and be able to lift a kid up and inspire them into a new pathway into the sector. But there's just no easy way to do that. And so we saw that as a problem. So we created this platform called Voluntarily, which means that you as a volunteer can register, and then you can donate an hour of your time, a day of your time, however much, whether it's you personally or part of your company's CSR program. So maybe you have a day a year that you can donate and volunteer. So we pair that up with schools who want to do cool things in classes that require people who know a little bit about technology or science. So they might be doing a bottle rocket exercise where they're just building bottle rockets, but they're also learning physics and engineering. And or they might be programming, they might be doing hour of code. So there's all these there's amazing workshops that lots of people do out there. They're like, there's Code Avengers and there's the science stuff like Michelle Dickinson does with Nano Girl. There's all this great content, and there's this immediate audience there, which is every school in New Zealand. It's just hungry for this stuff, but the teachers just don't have, not yet. They don't yet have the skill set to be able to confidently stand in front of a classroom of 30 kids and teach them about stuff. And so that's what Voluntarily does. It matches up this kind of unused volunteer time, from us, people who are in the industry. We match it up in a really safe and streamlined way, take care of all the police vetting, make sure that you as a volunteer, it's quite scary standing up in front of a classroom of 30 kids, sort of stepping you through that of, how you can do that. We're because I'm a tech guy and I can't stop building products, and so that's kind of the one that we're focusing on at the moment. We're going to hopefully launch that in a couple of months.
Very cool, very cool. It's amazing work, mate. And I think you highlighted a couple of things there. Just having been involved in some of this, game-changing stuff. 6 years was one of the phrases that it just takes a long time, and I know that you and Zoe and the trust and the team there are committed to that, and it's awesome stuff for our kids and for New Zealand. Mate, we're out of time. We've gone over time, in fact, and most of our audience is actually still with us. So I know that's a sign that they've really enjoyed engaging with you, and very privileged and appreciative of you taking the time to share with our community your story. And of course, you are, part of our community. Vend was, I think, one of the early landing pad residents, maybe even number 6 or 7 in the San Francisco side of things.
That's right.
So we had fun. So thank you very much. The last word is yours, if you have one, or words. Over to you, but to our community, thanks for joining us. This, of course, is available on demand in about sort of 15 to 30 minutes. If you have folks you want to share it onto, it'll be at territory3.community under the Academy section. So always available to watch on demand. And Vaughan Fergusson, thank you. The last word's yours.
Yeah, just thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I love any opportunity to tell my stories, and I've got a few. But I also encourage, the way that we as a community make ourselves stronger is by everybody sharing their stories. You may not think your story is anything special, but I guarantee you it is, because it's unique to what you're doing. And even if it's just a story about, a particular struggle that you're going through, I'd love the community to have more of these venues and opportunities to share, because that's the way we all learn, is by sharing the good and the bad, and so we can all realize that actually we're all normal. we're not frauds. Everybody's going through the same stuff. So I look forward to hearing from you all in time, sharing some of your stories, and maybe I can stick around for a bit and answer the questions that are in the Q&A.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That would be cool. I can. Can you see them?
Yeah, I think, I've got a button that I can click on and answer them. So
Sweet.
I might spend the next few minutes just making sure that everybody gets their question answered. So if you've got any dying questions, then flick them in the Q&A, and I can try and knock them off over the next 5-10 minutes.
Cool. Do you want to start at the top and work your way down?
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to I was just going to type them in, but yeah, I can just, if people are still there. I'm not too sure if people have gone or not. So maybe I'm not sure how this works.
No, I'm not sure either, but I'd just give it a go live, because they can always watch it on demand as well.
True. Yep, that's probably a good way to do it. Okay, so we'll start with my top one is Matt.
Yeah.
What is your advice for scaling your business to other countries? Would you go with boots on the ground or resellers partner? What would you tackle first? So you heard our story, which was like we just put boots on the ground. So it's a mix. So every time we opened up an office, like San Francisco, we were in the landing pad. We were the early tenants. I think it was us and Zero. We were the first two tenants in there. And so we use landing pad as literally that landing pad. We would fly over to San Francisco every month and then just be on the ground. And it was incredible just by being there. meetings and opportunities just happen because you'd be chatting to somebody and they'd be like, oh, you need to talk to, Blair at PayPal, or, or Susie at Google. And then the introductions would just happen, and you'd go down the valley and you'd meet these people, and then, they would either be able to help you or they'd open another door somewhere else, and that's not unique to the valley. We found that everywhere we went. So you just need to have that critical mass of people on the ground who are kind of living in the time zone and meeting people. And then as we grew, we would hire local. And so, I gave the example of JC. JC actually bounced around the world, setting up a few of our offices. And, because that was something he became great at, establishing the culture and then hiring locals who, click with the culture. And so you're not trying to spread yourself too thin across too many time zones. And then your partners, absolutely. Your partners, there are, chances are there's a whole ecosystem of people adding value into the industry that you were selling into. And so the easiest way, I find that one of the easiest ways to sell into an industry is through the existing sales channels that are already there, rather than you trying to start something different or pouring millions of dollars into Google AdWords. There are people pounding the pavement selling very similar things or complementary things to whatever it is you're doing. Make friends with them and incentivize them to sell your stuff as well. Yeah. Okay. I better give shorter answers or we'll be here for
a few questions, mate. You've really got people thinking.
This one's from Neil. Awesome wisdom from a serial entrepreneur. Many years I felt like I was walking on eggshells and everything was a lawsuit away from collapse. When do you think an entrepreneur needs to bring in legal and start getting things really organized, especially in the USA? Yeah. I was, I'll give you my lived experience. I was very fortunate in that we had legal counsel, or a form of legal counsel, pretty much from day one. And that was Sasha Judd, and she also became one of our investors. But she was kind of like startup lawyer. And, more often than not, I'd go do something and then tell Sasha, and then she would, tell me off and then come up with a plan for how we can cover our asses. So, we didn't get into trouble. You need to find somebody like that who can, but make sure you don't put them in the way. Like, and this is no disrespect to folks, legal folks, is that, their job is to stop you from doing really stupid shit, and to keep you out of trouble. And so, they will always have a glass half empty point of view on things. And so, but in the early stages, this is bad advice, it's going to get me into trouble, is, it's ask for forgiveness, not permission. It's like, go do stuff. And then it's like, oh, we've moved a bit too fast. I think we need to make sure that we're not going to get into trouble here. Then very quickly have that legal counsel, somebody who trusted, who you can bring on board, so to figure out whether you need to backtrack or whether you can plug the gaps. That's how I would go at it. Yeah. Next one from Julian. Hey, Julian. What would you have done differently? Sounds like you were happy with the call to step aside as CEO. Can you share one or two things where you got it wrong? Oh man, I think every day I got something wrong. It's just, it's like, if you try and optimize for never getting things wrong, you'll never do anything. The trick is to be wrong often, but then be able to backtrack or, reverse that decision very quickly. Yeah, and so I'll see if I can think of some examples. Oh my God, every day. Oh, shit, I don't know. The CEO, step aside as a CEO thing. The advice I was getting was that was a terrible idea, and I shouldn't do it. But I was like, well, I'll try it. And worst case scenario, I can always just stay in the role. I don't have to fire myself. I can just stick with it. And it just went with it. I think it was Jeff Bezos kind of came up with this this approach, which is, making sure that every decision you make, you'll have one-way decisions and two-way decisions. The one-way doors and two-way doors. If a decision that you can make is a two-way door, and that you can make that decision. If it doesn't work out well, there's always a path to turn around and come back through the door and close it, and not go through that door ever again. Then you should be doing those decisions all day long. But if it's a one-way decision, which is like once you make that decision and commit to it, there's no path back. You need to be very, very, very careful about making that decision. And as long as you can very quickly identify whether it's a two-way door or a one-way door, then yeah, make those two-way door decisions rapidly and as quickly as possible. But then be very mindful about the one-way doors. Second question from Julian: you raise most dollars overseas, counting Valar as US investors. Any thought you can share on New Zealand investor landscape? If you were starting something new, where would you go first for dollars? Interesting. Well, actually, even counting Valar as an offshore investor, I think the majority of our cap table was still New Zealand investors. So that's just a fact and clarification. So we returned a shit ton of cash into the New Zealand ecosystem. But yeah, we also had Square Peg from Australia, Point 9 from Berlin, Valar, either from San Francisco or New Zealand, depending on how you want to classify them. Who else do we have? Whole bunch of folk, yeah, from Singapore, all over the place. I think it's different now to how it was when I was raising, because, you know, I was very fortunate to know Sam and Rowan from TradeMe, and so they came on board as very early investors. But then very quickly, you know, we brought on board Point 9, who are, one of the most successful SaaS investors in the world. And you know, there's a crazy story about how they came on board. But today, the thing that's different, or what I'm hearing, is that there's a shit ton of cash sloshing around in New Zealand looking for a home. It's cool. It's like 10 years ago when I would go to San Francisco, I kind of had to spend the first 15 minutes of every meeting explaining, New Zealand, where New Zealand was, why I've got a funny accent. And investors were just terrified. All the Valley investors were just like, if they couldn't get in a car and drive to your office, then they just didn't want to touch you because
called it the Porsche rule.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was very, very hard. But the thing I'm hearing now is like, we're actually, we've got some great local VCs, but there's this flood of international VCs who are coming in, and they're kind of having to fight it out. Which is something that we didn't have. It was more the other way around. We had to go and fight overseas and to get investment. So that's different. I think, and this may be a window that might close, but I think you just need to. There's no right or wrong. We probably got a bit of criticism because we brought in a shit ton of overseas investment because that money's just going to go offshore when there's a liquidity. It's like there's no right or wrong. It's like bring in the investors that are going to, it's more than just the cash. It's like, what else can they add to your business? Because if it's just dumb money, then it's probably not a great investor to bring on board, unless you just want dumb money. And for us, having offshore investors in different markets opened a lot of doors for us. So yeah, I would use that as my consideration or my filter as to what else are they bringing. Okay, 4 more to go. Steve, did you go direct selling and or partnership resellers for the international expansion? What pros and cons were there with resellers if you used them or considered them? Yep. Yeah. We've pushed hard on partners and resellers, particularly early on. Things that are hard. Stuff I've talked about, just being there to build those relationships. If I think about our greatest resellers that we've had, always, I don't know whether it's self-fulfilling, but there was always a deep relationship. Turning up to trade shows, conferences, investing that one-on-one time. There's something to be said about just hanging out and having a beer, and you build a interpersonal relationship, and that goes such a long way. If you can build a friendship, and it's not all cut and thrust, the hard cut and thrust of business. You're building friendships with people, and as long as you're doing great stuff, then people will generally opt for people they trust and people they like. And so just be likable and be trustworthy and meet lots of people. And that's the best way to build up a reseller network. And then make sure there's something in it for them, so commission or, whatever it works for your particular industry. So you just need to look around at what other people are doing. But at some point it'll be same. Like you need to have something that differentiates you, so that will probably be your product. You need to have a kick-ass product. Yeah. Okay. Tracy, did you have a mentor or someone you look up to for inspirational guidance? I didn't deliberately. I just had, and still do, and always do, have smart people who I just go to and sort of shoot the breeze with. And I think as long as you're a lifelong learner and you're quite happy to listen to people's advice, and then, just build a great filter for, so which advice to take and which, ultimately that's what it comes down to is knowing which advice to take, which advice not to take. But yeah, I've never really looked up to, like, I don't idolize anybody, because, my firm belief is like everybody's journey is unique and different. Like there's no point going to chat to Elon Musk about stuff because he's busy thinking about space and electric cars and digging holes and whatever else he's focused on. He's in flamethrowers, and he's not an expert in your space. So you are. And so you just need to go and collect as much information and as much knowledge from as many people as possible, and then figure out which stuff makes sense to you and what you believe. Susie, just to dig into was going to build $1 billion company thing. What are your thoughts on creating unicorns in a Kiwi context? And thanks both for fronting the mental health piece. Super, super important. Creating unicorns. I think unicorns were cool. I think they probably still are cool. But I think there was this over obsession about unicorns. And definition of unicorn is building $1 billion business. But and the risk of that is quite often to build a unicorn. It's kind of go big or bust. Like maybe we kind of got sucked into that a bit. It's like, yeah, we're good, because like we were on a real tier and we were pioneering something that was really unique, and there was, a lot of interest in what we were doing. And so we ran hard at being a unicorn. But then, we tripped a few times and it was like, shit, like almost fell off the cliff. And then we realized it's like, yeah, actually, the measure is not building $1 billion business. The measure is building an amazing business and building an amazing product and having an amazing team. And if that turns into $1 billion valuation one day, awesome. We came within Kiwi of getting that $1 billion valuation, but that wasn't, that was just an idea I had. Actually, when I first started Vend, I said I wanted to build a $100 million company, and then it became a $200 million company, and then it became, and you just constantly,
inflation.
You hit $1 billion, and you're like, well, I'm going to build a $10 billion company. It never ever stops. So stop using that as a measure for success. Just build awesome shit, and make sure that you are having fun as you go. And then, if you build an awesome thing, have awesome people, then the luckier you get. Yeah. And last question, can you talk about, this is from Simon, can you talk about how you dealt with competitors locally and overseas? Yes. Depends on, like for us, it depends on how you think about competitors, because there'll be traditional competitors. Chances are you're doing something quite new, so you're not like just copying somebody else. Otherwise, you probably shouldn't do that, because you've just got your work cut out with you. If you follow Peter Thiel's advice, you should find the monopoly that you can go and own and have no competitors, because that's the fastest way to grow a really successful business. So that make sure that you're differentiating yourself with everybody. And then what we found is like competitors would then pop up, and not that they were copying us, but they would have the same idea around about the same time, strangely. And you know, my approach has always been go make friends with them, you know. Sort of that frenemies thing, which is like get to know them. Our biggest competitor acquired us, and that was because we knew them. I had Dax's phone number. I could ring him, or I'd see him at a conference, and we'd say hi and have a cocktail and things like that. And it's amazing what you learn. I remember, I'm a fairly memorable guy. I remember going, when I was in a city near a competitor's HQ, I would always drop them a line and say, "Hey, I'm in town. Can we catch up?" And then they'd give you the office tour, and it's amazing what you would learn. Like you can figure out how big they are. Are they just sort of talking shit about about their culture? And it's quite funny when you walk through their office and people look at you and going, "Are you Vaughan?" And then they'd freak out. But it's just get to know them. They're humans as well, and you never know what opportunities are actually going to come out of getting to know who your competitors are.
Legendary, mate. You nailed them all. 18 questions. It's a marathon, and it's an impossible challenge in itself. Challenge accepted and completed. Thanks, buddy, and thanks everyone for hanging in. I'm sure it's been well worth your time just listening to a few more of those questions answered, and have a great day and a great weekend.
Yeah, and thanks, John, for pulling this together.
All right, man.